I wanted to do this story because, yes, we know here, of course, in Quebec, new rules and regs concerning Airbnbs, right, ever since that tragic fire in Montreal. But what's happened since then has been really interesting because other cities and other jurisdictions, and I mentioned, I think at the time, New York, where there are so many Airbnbs, are tightening the screws on people who are doing this. And a lot of people do this, of course, as investments. They don't have one property. They have 2 and 3 and 5 and 10, and they actually use this to make a living. New York City doesn't want to see it anymore. And then just a couple of weeks ago, Vancouver decided to tighten things up as well. David Wachsmuth is a Canada Research Chair in Urban Governance. He's an associate professor at urban planning over at McGill. He's on the line. David, I know you're familiar with the story. My question is, as other cities are beginning to tighten, as I said, the screws, what's really changing here? Anything?
What's changing in New York is they are more or less making Airbnbs illegal. It's kind of full stop, and that's a huge switch in the city that's traditionally had a ton of tourism. But I don't think it's one we're going to see emulated so much here in Montreal or elsewhere.
Well, will it even make a difference? That's what I wonder. I think about the Airbnb in Old Montreal, and it was operating illegally. Those weren't valid Airbnbs, and so what will regulation actually accomplish?
Well, it's a good question, but the thing is that if you go to Airbnb, you try to book, an apartment, it says you're booking it from Alice, right? And you don't know who Alice is. It's probably not their real name. And whatever that photo is, it's not their real photo, right?
Right.
Everything's anonymous. And governments have the same problems that we do there. So actually having some rules that mean everybody has to register does solve the problem of, like, who do you go after if somebody's not obeying the rules? And until recently here in Quebec, that was just a complete nightmare because nobody was following the rules. Nobody's getting registered. That's one thing that's really changed clearly for the better in the last couple of months here.
How much, I know at the beginning, Airbnb kind of had their backup. I know we kept trying to reach people here in their Toronto office. They didn't want to say much, and they continue really to just kind of, walk away and say they will do what the government's suggesting they do. How much of this is incumbent on them? I mean, up until now, it's been just basically a money machine, right? People put their stuff up, they rent it out, they make their money. They don't want to get involved any more than they already are. So are they a willing participant in this?
Airbnb has never once in the history of this company been a willing participant in any of these kind of rules. What they are is a reluctant participant that will eventually do what they're asked to do if the fines get big enough. That's just the basic truth here. And I think it's what happened in Quebec, right? Finally the thing that cracked them was the minister saying they're going to be fines of $100,000 a listing on Airbnb, right? And, that's enough money that you either follow the rules, you get out of the province. And they finally decide they're going to follow the rules. But that's what it took.
So you're seeing other municipalities, enforce tougher rules. Do we worry about the future of Airbnb? I mean, is this going to become a business that just outlives itself?
Well, I go back 10 years and think, Airbnb was a platform for home sharing, right? I mean, it's almost kind of easy to forget that, but it used to be a place where you got a spare bedroom or maybe
couch.
You're away, yeah, exactly. You're out of town for a weekend, let somebody stay in your place. That's actually a really good model. It's, it's win-win, right, for cities because you get a little bit extra money in your pocket and the city gets some more visitors. I think that Airbnb could be a perfectly great place to have that kind of home sharing. That stuff's just been pushed out of the market by all the kind of, commercial and sometimes illegal full-time short-term rentals.
Right, and that then becomes a different thing, a different model than what we're seeing now and what's having such a devastating impact on housing, on rentals.
That's exactly right. I mean, the way I always like to say this is home sharing is a good thing, and I actually wish we saw more of it. The problem is all the home sharers got put out of business by people taking entire apartments, pulling them off the rental market and making them, homes for tourists instead.
By the way, from what I saw, correct me if I'm wrong here, the idea in New York, and I think in Vancouver as well, if you want to be able to put a place up there, and I don't know when this takes effect, but the idea is you will have to be there with the person like you're describing it here at the same time. In other words, they can't be staying in your place if you're not there, right? Which is the original home sharing concept. That's what they're starting to do, are they not?
Yeah, that's right. And I do think, at least for my taste, I think that goes a little bit far. Like, I think it makes sense to, say, look, it's my house and I live here, and if I'm out of town for the weekend, let somebody stay there. So that's not allowed in New York anymore. I think that, a reasonable compromise is you live in the house, it's your house. You make the decision, right? But the big thing we want to make sure we avoid is I just bought up 5 apartments on my block and I kicked out all the tenants, and now it's a bunch of tourists, So that's,
Right.
I think that's kind of the sweet spot there. New York's going further. They got a lot of hotels. I guess they feel like they can afford it. But I don't think that's really a model for Montreal.
I still just have that feeling that the genie's out of the bottle here, that this is too far gone. And I think even if Airbnb pays the price and another platform will arise, I mean, it started on Craigslist for me a million years ago. So will not just another platform replace it and do it its own way as well?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. To be honest, actually, New York, they passed a rule banning short-term rentals in 1929.
Holy.
Yeah, because, you had people kind of coming and staying in Hell's Kitchen near Times Square, in kind of these very short-term casual rentals. So they didn't even have to change their law to ban Airbnb. It was already banned 100 years ago. But I do think that, the technology makes it easier. We're going to see more competitors in this space for sure. But I think that's part of why it's important to just kind of get some good, simple rules in place,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
and just start pushing on the enforcement.